Hi, guys, and welcome to a Christmas special of the Timeline Show, which is also the seventh in the series overall. And I thought I'd go over the timeline of Disney's The Santa Claus franchise. Now, just for reference, that includes the three films they put out plus the Santa Clauses. That's between 1994 and 2023. Before we do that, though, let's actually go a bit over the backstory. So, before the films, here we go. Now, as the franchise actually tells us, the origins of Santa, or Santa Claus, date back to the, well, 4th century St. Nicholas of Myra. And the tradition of Santa Claus began when he donated his riches to help the poor. He was canonized as a saint, so St. Nicholas of Myra, and eventually, as he grew older, he moved his base of operations to the North Pole with an army of ethereal elves just fading into existence, and started delivering toys around the world every Christmas Eve. And every generation, a new ethereal Santa would come into play. And around this time also would be the other legendary figures that we'd meet in the franchise itself: Mother Nature, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy. Cupid already existed from ancient Greek mythology, or ancient Roman mythology. And Father Time, as the council of legendary figures would form around these earlier days. Now, this is actually a concrete date I've worked out from Scott Sage in the first film being mentioned as 38 by the later scenes of the film. So, in 1957, Scott Calvin is born to two unnamed parents. So we'll just call them Mr. and Mrs. Calvin. In 1965, when Scott is 8 years old, he's up on Christmas Eve that night when the 17th iteration of Santa Claus comes down his chimney and basically tells him he's going to be destined for greatness after he states his wish is for his whole family to get what they wish for. Unfortunately, though, that memory is stripped away from him, and he grows up into an inconsiderate man. Well, first of all, he grows up to meet and marry a young woman named Laura. We'll have to say this is sometime in the late 70s or early 80s. The actual time and date is unknown. But, okay, another concrete date from Charlie's age, being said to be 8 years old in the first film. Well, there's probably 9 by the end. So shall we just say sometime in 1986, Charlie Calvin is born to Scott and Laura Calvin. And sometime while Charlie is still young, Scott and Laura divorce. And she meets and marries a sweater-wearing psychiatrist named Neil Miller, becoming Laura Miller in the process. So we get in there. So this means we now get into the events of the film, starting with although released in 1994, the film opens on Christmas Eve 1994, when we see Scott Calvin has grown into an inconsiderate executive at a toy company, and he's looking after his now 8-year-old son, Charlie, on Christmas Eve. Neil and Laura are waiting for him outside his house. Now, the mishap actually happens on Christmas Eve, after Scott is putting Charlie to bed and has gone to bed himself, when they hear a clatter on their roof, and Scott goes out to investigate to find Santa Claus about to climb down his chimney. He frightens him off his roof, he frightens him, causing him to fall. And upon inspecting Santa's card, instructing him to put on the coat and the reindeer will know what to do, Scott puts on Santa's coat and is unwittingly locked into becoming the new Santa Claus. So he is now the one who has to deliver all the toys around the world before returning to the North Pole, where he meets the elves. Where the head elf also tells him that after putting on the suit, he has fallen subject to the Santa Claus, which basically is a contract that says he now has to assume the identity and the responsibilities of Santa Claus. And unwilling to accept this at first, Scott just wants a direct plane back to reality, as he puts it. But he doesn't believe in the magic of a holiday anymore. Now, he has no choice in the matter, he's been forced into this contract. And so, over the course of the next year, an unjolly Scott develops a Santa-sized tummy and grows a beard. And with Charlie's insistence that he is Santa and his insistent disbelief in it at first, actually helping him to believe that he is Santa, well, Neil and Laura think he's gone a little bit cuckoo, mad. By Christmas 1995, and now 38-year-old Scott is on his Christmas rounds with Charlie after being fully formed into Santa Claus, where he is apprehended at the miller's house. So all those cops are going on the naughty list for life. How dare you, cops? After breaking Scott out of his police cell, Charlie returns home to Neil and Laura, where Scott actually explains to him that he needs to stay with them because they're family too. And so, that's where the first film ends, as Scott, now a fully fledged Santa Claus, gives Neil and Laura the gifts they've been waiting for their whole lives, the ones that stopped them believing in Santa to begin with, and takes Charlie for a quick ride, with Laura's permission. So yeah, the first film takes place between Christmas 1994, sorry, and Christmas 1995. Now, before we jump ahead into the second film, there's some more timeline dates that need to be sorted that happened in between all this. So this is the 8-year interval. So what happens in the interval between the first and second films, you might be wondering? Well, in 1997, Lucy Miller is born to Neil and Laura Miller, Charlie's younger half-sister. Now, we know she's in 1996 or 1997, because she's 6 in the Santa Claus 2, and she says she's about to turn 7. We'll get there, though. And also, in that time at the North Pole, Curtis rises to the rank of second in command to the elves. Where was he in the first film then? Anyway, that is, of course, as far as we know, the interval between the first 2 films. So let's get in now to 8 years have passed since the end of the first film. It is now Christmas time 2003, and Scott, who has been the current Santa for 8 years, is dismayed to learn that his son Charlie, now 17 years old, I guess, has landed himself a spot on the naughty list, and he needs to go off and help with the discipline, I guess, and be there for Charlie. So, he is convinced by Curtis, the second in command to the elves, to create a toy copy of himself to deal with business at the North Pole while Scott's away dealing with Charlie. Now, while Scott's away doing this, trouble happens at the North Pole with the toy Santa. He starts thinking all the children of the world are naughty, and turns the North Pole into a dictatorship, instructing them to make coal and distribute that to all the children of the world instead of toys. Meanwhile, at the Miller household, where Scott has now arrived, we catch up with Neil and Laura again, where we meet young Lucy. Now, I'm gonna guess she's his goddaughter because she calls him Uncle Scott, but really, we meet them at Charlie's high school when he is caught defacing school property by Carol Newman, the principal of his high school. And Scott is not very good at disciplining his son. He makes him promise not to do it again, only for him to deface the school lockers the next time he lashes out. Because after 8 years of having to keep Scott's identity as Santa Claus a secret, I should have mentioned that in the last segments, the pressure to do that has now made Charlie crack under the strain, and he started lashing out. And also, after learning that Scott, before he left the North Pole to come and deal with Charlie, he learned of the Mrs. Clause, which states that if he doesn't find a wife in 28 days, he can't be Santa anymore, and he's already been desantified. So, But being Santa made him the man he is. So, he begins a courtship with Carol Newman after a failed date with a woman named Tracy. And also, at the beginning of the film, we meet Danielle, Charlie's girlfriend. We don't see her anymore after that, though, apart from a couple more scenes. And basically, this all culminates in Scott having to return to the North Pole to help them defeat the evil toy Santa. And then, obviously, they all convene with Charlie there at the North Pole and everyone else, as Scott confesses to Carol that he needs to find a wife by Christmas Eve that night in order to continue to be Santa Claus. So, yes, they end up getting married right then and there. And that is where the film ends, as he transforms back into Santa and goes on his rounds. In the very last scene, they reveal Scott's identity to Lucy as Santa Claus. But she'd already worked it out through the course of the film anyway, because he had a reindeer with him, so why wouldn't she? um, so... And this film is where we meet all the other legendary figures for the first time as well, and why is the Tooth Fairy a bloke? I mean, come on. It's normally depicted as a little humanoid woman. Not that there's anything wrong with it. No. I'm just saying. Anyway. In between this film and the third film, another 4 years go by. But we're not going to go into another 4-year interval because not much happens in that time. Let's just go straight to the third film. So there we go, as I've just said before. 4 years have now passed since the end of the second film in the series, in the franchise. And after 12 years in the role, by Christmas 2007, where did I get that name from? Scott, who's been Santa for the last 12 years, as I've just said, is becoming a father again, as his wife Carol is pregnant with their child. And also to deal with the stresses of a depressed wife and having to bring her parents up to see them because she had to give up her civilian life to become Mrs. Claus, which she did willingly, by the way. So, this culminates in Scott agreeing to bring her parents up to the North Pole, meaning that he goes down to the North Pole, meaning that, and also that Jack Frost, played by Martin Short, this is his first and only appearance in the franchise. Yeah. Has attempted to upstage him some 270 times. And they're calling this emergency council meeting at the pole to decide how to discipline him. And at first, they all vote unanimously to suspend him from the council until he convinces them to give him another chance and sentence him to community service instead. And Then he goes down to bring not only Bud and Sylvia Newman up, that's Carol's parents, by the way, but also Neil, Lucy, and Laura to the pole for the first time since they've never visited before. And with the secret of Santa now open to them, they don't do as they're instructed and stay with a short and small group. They go wandering off to explore the North Pole. And here's where we learn about the escape clause. Now, basically, the escape clause is invoked when the incumbent Santa wishes upon it that he had never taken on the role of Santa at all. And it catapults them back in time to the Christmas in which they first became the big red guy. No, not him, Santa. So, after Jack Frost learns of this, he sneaks into the Hall of Snow Globes where each Santa throughout history has kept his own personal snow globe and steals Scott's snow globe, and then tricks him into invoking the escape clause. Now, how exactly does the escape clause work? The incumbent Santa has to hold it in his hand and then state the wish, I wish I'd never become Santa at all. Yes, so after being unknowingly tricked into that, they're catapulted back in time to Scott and Jack are catapulted back in time to Christmas Eve 1994, where it is instead Jack who frightens their Santa off the roof and steals the coat for himself. And this then creates an alternate timeline in which Scott carries on. God, this is complicated. Down the same path he would have done had he not become Santa Claus. And upon learning that Jack Frost has turned the North Pole into a theme park, he then gets a plane up there to try and get him to switch places back with him. He's unsuccessful at this at first. Now, in all this time, in this 12-year time span, the strain on Neil to be Charlie's father got too much after they had Lucy, Neil and Laura, so they divorced. And Neil got custody of Lucy. And of course, Charlie grew ever distant in this timeline, and Laura became a bitter middle-aged woman. But in the end, as a team, Scott and Lucy manage to retrieve the snow globe again, and Scott manages to trick Jack into undoing his time as Santa by recording him saying that wish into a fiber optic pen that records voices. You with me here? While holding the snow globe. And this then returns them to the moment Scott made the wish, and he doesn't go through with it, foiling Jack's plan once and for all. And then, because secrets aren't for families, he reveals to the in-laws about him being Santa, and it all ends happily. Yes, so the alternate timeline is created through this film. That's why I waited until now to explain it to you. Now, it ends with the birth of Buddy Claus, the son of Scott Santa Claus Calvin and Carol Newman, Mrs. Claus. And then, guys, this is where the film series ends. And it wouldn't be for another 17 years that we got the Disney Plus TV series. Okay, so it is now 28 years since Scott has become Santa Claus. It's Christmas Eve 2022, and he's out delivering presents on Christmas Eve with his best friend Noel. And of course, in between that, there's a new chief of staff rose again in Betty, is it? And also, Scott is now beginning to question whether he should continue on as Santa after having spent nearly 30 years in the role and having spent so many Christmases away from his family. But in the 28 years, the son, Buddy, now known as Cal, has grown up, and Scott and Carol have had also a daughter named Sandra. Now, at first, Scott's excited. Now, as he starts to question whether he should continue on as Santa, we then learn about the successors clause, which will allow Scott to retire as soon as he chooses a worthy successor. At first, he thinks excitedly of Charlie taking over the role because of an offhand comment he makes at the end of the first film, stating that he's going to go into the family business. Wait, a toy executive? No, Santa Claus, of course. And we get a call back to the previous Santa falling off Scott's roof, when Scott himself falls off a roof. So he visits Charlie, who, in the intervening time, has grown up and married a woman named Marie and had 2 sons. So he's a family man himself now, and is not willing to take on the role of Santa. So, after a long search, he settles on a tech entrepreneur named Simon. Oh dear, who completely disregards the meaning of Christmas and his own daughter, and turns the North Pole into a delivery center. And in the year that he controls the North Pole, the magic of Christmas and the magic of Santa completely fades away, and all the elves die out. And this sends Scott onto a tour over the history of the role of Santa Claus and his origins, and leads him to reclaim the role of Santa by putting on his old red coat. So much for retiring then, eh, Scott? But he does it to save Christmas, because his successor that he himself chose was worse than he was when he was chosen to be the new Santa Claus. And he was Scott, by the way, was the first human Santa Claus. Yeah. But this time he brings his family, that's his wife and children, onto the front line with him on his on his delivery rounds. So, all ends pretty happily. And of course, that would be by Christmas 2023 in the timeline that the North Pole becomes a delivery center. Anyway, so That is the entire, some 30-year timeline of the Santa Claus franchise, which I've now just realised here in 2024. This year's the 30th anniversary of the first film's release. So this is a 30th anniversary episode as well. Okay. For the Santa Claus. But guys, I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll be back in the new year for more episodes of the Timeline Show. But until then, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Merry Christmas and have us a magical time.